Functions are very important in programming, so let's see how we make a function in Scratch. This is how to learn Scratch programming language. The Scratch programming language is free, fun and easy to learn. Most programming languages are text-based, so a learner has to gain experience writing the code, but Scratch program is easier as it uses blocks. The learner selects blocks, puts them together and runs the program in a simple way, making it the most fun and easiest way to learn programming. We've used the duplicate quite often in our programs. Wouldn't it be great if you keep repeating the same code, if you could put it somewhere and just call it with just a simple name? Well, you can. That's called a function, and you can create functions in Scratch using MyBlock. So let's have a look at MyBlock. We go to MyBlocks and we can make a block. So here we're going to create a function. We can start off by giving it a name. Let's just create a very simple one called multiply. Now that's the function name. Now we're going to add something. We're just going to add a number. So we're just going to call that, let's call it my number. My number. Okay. So we click OK. So now we have this function. Now we want this function to include some code. So here let's go to my variable and let's create a variable called my number. And in this example, let's just imagine my variable is just going to equal itself multiplied by itself squared. So we've got my number times by my number. So this is very simple example. So now when we call the function, that's what it will do. So in this program, let's imagine we'll start off simple with a variable just multiplying 2 by 2. So we got my number, set that to 2, and then we need to multiply my number, and the answer we can put into my variable. So we create the variable first, if you like, the function first, and then we call the code, we call that function, and then it runs that code. So let's run that. So we've got my number, my variable. When we run that, we can see my number equals 2, my variable equals 4. So perhaps we should say that for 2 seconds. So the answer is my variable. So let's run that with, let's say, 100. So let's run that. You can see my number equals 100, my variable equals 10,000. We can change it so we start using, say, let's say like a loop. So let's just take these out and start off where we were before and have the variable my number equal 0. And then maybe change it. Let's have a loop, for example. So let's repeat 3 times and then change the number by 2. So let's start off with 1. And so we're going to start off with number 1, and then we have a loop 3 times. We're going to change my number by 2, so it's going to equal 1, 3, 5 and 7, and then we want to multiply and we want to pass my number, and then we want to see our answer. So let's say my number for 2 seconds. Okay, so let's use my variable to give the answer. So let's make it a bit easier to understand. Let's give a variable answer, and we're going to set answer to equal my number times my number. So my number is going to equal 1, 3, 5 and 7, and answer is going to be the squared of that number. So let's have a look at that. So the answer is 1, the answer is 3 times 3 is 9, 5 times 5 25, and my number 7, it stops because we didn't call the function. You can see we changed the number, but we didn't call the function after. So if we change that there, that means we're not going to square 1, we're going to multiply 3 by 3, 5 by 5, 7 by 7. So it depends where you call the function, what's going to happen. So that's a simple version of a function. So imagine if we had quite a lot of blocks, that would save a lot of work duplicating. So that's an example of a function. Let's look at another example. Here we've created a function called calculate pay, and we've got pay, name, hours and rate. So we start off by saying the rate of pay for each person. So here John gets a rate of 100, Andy gets a rate of 80, and we set the pay to equal the hours times by the rate. So the pay is basically the rate times the hours, and then we're going to say the person's pay for 2 seconds. Now obviously there could be quite a lot of employees, a lot of people name that we would need to include in here, but we're only going to set the pay rate once, don't need to do it loads of times. So if we did this in a normal code, we'd have to repeat it quite a lot of times. Now we've got an example here. Let's move this down a second. So we set the name to John and how many hours they work, and then we call the function. Set name Andy, we call the function. So we've only created 2 names here, but you can see how we duplicate the same code, and by using the function we've reduced the amount of blocks that we need. So when we run this program, you can see we've got John 4,000 and Andy, let's run that again, John 4,000 and Andy 4,000. So it works out that it's the same. So now let's move on to our task of creating a function that determines if a number is positive, negative or equals 0. Let's start off by just creating a number. So let's say my num, a variable called my num. So we're going to set the variable, let's just set it to 2. Okay, so at the start we're going to set our number to 2. Now we need to create our function. So we go to my blocks, we're going to make a block, let's call this my function, and we're going to add the input of my number. So the function name, we've called it my function, and here we can add an input, either a number or text. We're going to add a number, and we've called it my number. Okay, so here's our function. Now we want to tell if the number is positive or negative or 0. So we can look at an if-else block. So we want to determine if it's, let's say, negative. If it's not, we need to determine if it's 0 or positive. So we can put an if-else block inside another if-else block. So we need to determine if it's less than, let's say if it's less than 0, it's going to be negative. So we look for our my number, and then we're going to say negative for 2 seconds. If it's positive, would be if it's greater than 0. So let's have greater than 0. So let's get my number again. We can duplicate that. And if it's not negative and it's not positive, then it's going to be equal to 0. So we're checking to see if it's less than 0. If it's not less than 0, is it greater than 0? So here, the first if checks to see if it's negative. If it's not negative, it's either positive or 0. So we check to see if it's positive, and if it's not positive, it's going to equal 0. So the only thing we need to do now is we need to call our function. We need to tell the blocks that we want to use these other blocks, and we need to pass it my number. So in normal programming, you pass something to a function and you may return it from a function. So let's have a look at this. Let's start off with the number 2. We know the number 2 is positive, so that's correct. Let's try minus 2. Minus 2 is negative. And let's just check 0 and 0 correctly says 0. So that's our code. We created a number called my number, a variable called my number, and we set it to 2 minus 2 or 0. We called the function. Inside the function we check to see if it was less than 0. If it is less than 0, we say negative. If it's not, we then check to see if it's greater than 0. If it is, it's positive, and if it's not less than 0 and it's not greater than 0, then it must equal 0. Now if you're interested in learning more or learning other programming languages, then please subscribe, and every time a video comes out, if you hit that notification bell, then that will let you know.